Multiple unknowns on scope. Track and report.
Copy. Designating tracks. They're fast.
Get me IDs. This could escalate.
The room is dim. Screens glow in cold blue light. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, inside a NATO early warning station, a radar operator leans forward. A cluster of unidentified aerial signatures flickers across the display. Fast, precise, and moving in coordinated patterns near contested airspace. No alarms sound yet, but the silence feels deliberate. Thousands of kilometers away, in the Western Pacific, satellites capture a different kind of movement. A formation of Chinese naval vessels, destroyers, frigates, and support ships, tightens its position along key maritime routes near Taiwan. The sea is calm. The tension is not. At the same moment, in a major financial hub, systems begin to fail. A cyber intrusion, subtle, calculated, ripples through critical infrastructure. Power grids stutter. Communications lag. No missiles. No explosions. Just disruption. High above it all, nuclear-capable bombers adjust their flight paths. Quietly, routinely, but not unnoticed. None of these events, on their own, signal war. Together, they form a pattern that military analysts, intelligence agencies, and world leaders are watching closely. Because across continents and domains, land, sea, air, cyber, and space, the world's most dangerous military flashpoints are no longer isolated. They are converging. The global order that defined the early 21st century is shifting. For nearly 3 decades after the end of the Cold War, the international system was shaped largely by a single dominant power. The United States maintained unmatched military reach, economic influence, and alliance networks stretching across Europe, Asia, and beyond. Conflict still existed, but was often regional, contained, and rarely threatened the balance of the entire system. That era is ending. In its place, a more complex and competitive landscape is emerging, one defined not by one superpower, but by multiple centers of power, each pursuing its own strategic interests. At the center of this transformation is the rise of China. Over the past 2 decades, China has undertaken one of the most rapid military modernizations in modern history. Its defense budget has grown steadily, funding advanced missile systems, cyber capabilities, naval expansion, and space-based assets. The People's Liberation Army is no longer a primarily regional force. It is evolving into one capable of projecting power far beyond its borders. Aircraft carriers patrol farther. Hypersonic weapons are tested. Artificial intelligence is integrated into battlefield decision-making systems. This transformation is not occurring in isolation. It is unfolding alongside a deepening strategic rivalry with the United States, a competition that spans trade, technology, military positioning, and global influence. From semiconductor restrictions to naval patrols in contested waters, both nations are actively shaping the environment around them. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, another shift has already turned into open conflict. Russia's actions in Ukraine, beginning with the annexation of Crimea and escalating into the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, have reintroduced large-scale conventional warfare to the European continent. What was once considered unlikely, a prolonged, high-intensity conflict involving a major military power, is now a defining feature of the global security environment. The response from NATO has been equally significant. Member states have increased defense spending at levels not seen since the Cold War era. New deployments have reinforced the alliance's eastern flank. Countries historically neutral have reconsidered their positions, with Finland joining NATO and Sweden moving toward deeper integration. Military exercises have grown in scale and frequency. Deterrence has become the central doctrine once again. But this is not just a return to old patterns. It is an expansion into new domains. Global military spending has surged, reaching record levels in recent years. Nations are investing not only in traditional forces, tanks, aircraft, and naval fleets, but also in cyber warfare units, autonomous drones, and space-based surveillance systems. The battlefield itself is evolving. Conflicts are no longer defined solely by geography. They extend into digital infrastructure, financial systems, and communication networks. At the same time, the mechanisms that once helped manage global tensions are weakening. Arms control agreements that once limited the spread and deployment of nuclear and conventional weapons are eroding. The Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty has collapsed. Other agreements face uncertainty. Without these frameworks, transparency decreases. Miscalculation becomes more likely. And in a system where multiple powers operate with advanced capabilities, even small misjudgments can carry global consequences. Across continents, a pattern is becoming visible. Military forces are repositioning. Alliances are strengthening. Rivalries are sharpening. Not in isolation, but simultaneously. The world is not yet at global war, but is no longer at stable peace either. It exists in a state in between, where competition is constant, tensions are persistent, and the margin for error is narrowing. And as this new era takes shape, the pressure is not distributed evenly. It is concentrated, focused on specific regions where geography, strategy, and power intersect. Places where a single incident could trigger something far larger. The emerging global order is not only defined by rising powers and renewed competition. It is defined by fragmentation. Across regions once held together by economic interdependence and diplomatic balance, fault lines are widening, reshaping how nations cooperate, compete, and prepare for conflict. At the center of this fragmentation is the intensifying rivalry between the United States and China. This competition is no longer limited to trade disputes or diplomatic disagreements. It now extends into critical technologies, supply chains, and military positioning. Restrictions on advanced semiconductor exports, competition over 5G infrastructure, and the race for dominance in artificial intelligence have turned economic policy into a strategic weapon. In parallel, both nations are increasing their military presence across the Indo-Pacific. Freedom of navigation operations, joint exercises with regional allies, and expanded naval deployments have become routine. Each move is calculated, each response measured. But nowhere is this rivalry more sensitive than in the status of Taiwan. For Beijing, Taiwan represents a core national objective tied to sovereignty and territorial integrity. For Washington and its allies, it represents a critical partner in global supply chains and a symbol of regional stability. Military aircraft crossings, naval patrols, and defense commitments have turned the Taiwan Strait into one of the most closely watched regions on Earth. A single miscalculation here would not remain local. It would draw in major powers within hours. Further west, instability takes a different form. The Middle East remains a network of overlapping conflicts, alliances, and proxy confrontations. The tension between Iran and Israel continues to shape regional security dynamics. Iran's regional influence, through allied groups and strategic positioning, extends across multiple countries. Israel, in response, has conducted targeted operations aimed at limiting military threats, particularly those linked to missile development and nuclear capabilities. These interactions rarely escalate into direct war, but they remain persistent, unpredictable, and capable of sudden escalation. Energy routes pass through this region. Global markets depend on its stability. Any disruption would have immediate worldwide effects. Beyond traditional conflict zones, a quieter form of confrontation is unfolding. Economic warfare, sanctions, Trade restrictions and financial controls are increasingly used as tools of pressure. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, sweeping sanctions were imposed on Russia, targeting banks, energy exports, and access to international markets. These measures did not remain contained. They reshaped global energy flows, disrupted supply chains, and accelerated efforts by multiple countries to reduce dependence on existing financial systems. Alternatives are being explored. Parallel systems are emerging. The global economy itself is becoming more divided. At the same time, a new domain of conflict continues to expand, one without borders and often without immediate attribution. Cyber warfare. State-linked actors have demonstrated the ability to disrupt critical infrastructure, influence information flows, and access sensitive systems. Attacks on power grids, financial institutions, and government networks are no longer theoretical risks. They are documented realities. Unlike traditional warfare, cyber operations can unfold in seconds. They can escalate without warning, and they can occur without clear evidence of who is responsible. This ambiguity complicates response decisions, increasing the risk of escalation based on incomplete information. Layered on top of this is the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence in military systems. Autonomous drones, real-time battlefield analytics, and decision support algorithms are changing how conflicts are planned and executed. Speed is becoming a defining factor, reducing the time leaders have to assess, decide, and respond. In such an environment, stability depends not only on strength, but on control. Control over systems. Control over information. Control over escalation. Yet across multiple regions, that control is being tested. All of these dynamics, strategic rivalry, regional instability, economic division, and technological transformation, are not unfolding separately. They are intersecting, creating a global landscape where pressure is concentrated in specific locations. Locations where military forces are already positioned, where alliances are already defined, where tensions are already active. These are not hypothetical scenarios. They are real-world flashpoints. And within these regions, the margin between deterrence and conflict is becoming increasingly narrow. The waters surrounding Taiwan are among the most heavily monitored on Earth. On any given day, military aircraft cross into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Naval vessels operate just beyond visible range. Surveillance systems track every movement, above, on, and beneath the surface. For China, Taiwan is not a distant objective. It is central to national strategy. Official policy maintains that reunification is a priority, and the use of force has never been ruled out. For the United States, the situation is deliberately complex. Strategic ambiguity, supporting Taiwan's defense without formal recognition, has long been the balancing mechanism. But that balance is under pressure. Advanced weapons systems are being deployed. Military exercises simulate blockade scenarios. Amphibious capabilities are expanding. The Taiwan Strait is not just a regional issue. It is a convergence point for global supply chains, particularly semiconductors, components essential to everything from smartphones to advanced weapons systems. A conflict here would not remain contained. It would immediately involve major naval forces, disrupt global trade, and force rapid decisions from multiple governments. And because both sides are prepared, but not seeking open war, the risk lies not in intention, but in miscalculation. In Eastern Europe, the line between deterrence and direct confrontation is becoming increasingly thin. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, military activity along NATO's eastern flank has intensified. Reinforcements have been deployed to countries bordering Russia. Air patrols have increased. Exercises simulate rapid response scenarios. For Russia, the conflict in Ukraine is part of a broader strategic contest with the West. For NATO, it is a test of collective defense and credibility. So far, both sides have avoided direct engagement, but proximity increases risk. Aircraft operate within minutes of each other. Naval forces encounter one another in confined waters. Electronic warfare systems probe defenses, testing responses. Incidents, near collisions, misidentified signals, or unintended escalation, are not hypothetical. They are expected possibilities. Complicating this environment is the presence of nuclear doctrine. Russia maintains one of the world's largest nuclear arsenals and has signaled its role in deterrence. NATO, backed by U.S. nuclear capabilities, operates under its own strategic framework. Neither side seeks escalation, but both are prepared for it. And in a high-pressure environment where decisions must be made quickly, the margin for error becomes critically small. To the south, another flashpoint stretches across vital maritime routes. The South China Sea is not defined by a single conflict, but by overlapping claims, strategic positioning, and constant presence. Multiple countries assert territorial rights here, but it is the scale of activity by China that has drawn the most attention. Artificial islands have been constructed and reinforced. Airstrips, radar installations, and missile systems extend operational reach across the region. For neighboring states, these developments raise concerns about access, sovereignty, and freedom of navigation. For the United States and its allies, the response has been consistent. Maintain open sea lanes and challenge excessive maritime claims through regular naval operations. As a result, military vessels from multiple nations now operate in close proximity, often within visual range. The South China Sea carries a significant portion of global trade. Energy shipments, commercial shipping, and communication cables all pass through these waters. A disruption here would ripple across continents. Unlike more defined conflict zones, the risk in this region comes from accumulation. Frequent encounters, increasing militarization, rising strategic importance. Each interaction carries a small risk, but over time, those risks compound. And in a region where so many interests intersect, even a single incident, misinterpreted or mismanaged, could escalate rapidly beyond control. 3 regions, 3 different dynamics, but one shared reality. All are active, all are heavily militarized, and all involve major global powers operating in close proximity. The conditions for stability still exist, but they are under constant strain. And beyond these visible tensions, other flashpoints, less traditional but equally dangerous, are beginning to emerge. Across the Middle East, tension often moves quietly until it doesn't. The strategic rivalry between Iran and Israel has evolved into a prolonged shadow conflict, fought through intelligence operations, cyber activities, and indirect engagements across multiple. Iran's regional network extends through allied groups and strategic positions in countries such as Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. This network provides depth, deterrence, and the ability to project influence without direct confrontation. Israel, facing what it views as an expanding threat environment, has conducted targeted strikes aimed at limiting military infrastructure, weapons transfers, and missile development linked to Iranian interests. These operations are often precise, limited, deniable, but the pattern is persistent. Missile exchanges, drone interceptions, and covert actions create a cycle of response and counter-response. Each side calibrates its actions carefully, seeking to avoid full-scale war while maintaining strategic pressure. The risk lies in escalation beyond intention. A single high-impact strike, a misinterpreted signal, or a breakdown in restraint could rapidly shift this shadow conflict into open confrontation. And if that happens, regional alliances could activate quickly, drawing in external powers, disrupting energy flows, and expanding the conflict beyond its current boundaries. Not all flashpoints are visible on a map. Some exist within networks, silent, continuous, and global. Cyber warfare has become an integrated component of national security strategies. State-linked actors now possess the capability to infiltrate critical infrastructure, disrupt communications, and influence decision-making processes without deploying a single conventional weapon. Power grids, financial systems, transportation networks, all are potential targets. Recent years have demonstrated the scale of this capability. Coordinated cyber operations have affected government institutions, private sector systems, and essential services across multiple countries. Attribution remains one of the greatest challenges. Unlike conventional attacks, cyber operations can be obscured, routed through layers of infrastructure, masked behind false signatures, and executed without immediate detection. This ambiguity complicates response decisions. A disruption may be seen as a technical failure or as an act of aggression. And in high-tension environments, that distinction matters, because retaliation in cyberspace does not always remain in cyberspace. A significant attack on critical infrastructure could trigger responses across multiple domains: economic, military, and political. The battlefield is not defined by geography. It is defined by access. And in a world where systems are increasingly interconnected, that access is expanding. A new form of risk is emerging, not from geography, but from technology. Artificial intelligence is transforming how military systems operate. Autonomous drones, real-time data analysis, and decision support algorithms are being integrated into defense strategies by multiple nations. These systems offer speed, precision, and adaptability. But they also introduce new uncertainties. In traditional conflict, human decision-making provides a layer of control, time to assess, interpret, and respond. With AI-driven systems, that time is reduced. Decisions can be made in seconds. Reactions can be automated. In some cases, engagement processes may occur faster than human operators can intervene. This acceleration creates a new kind of escalation risk. An autonomous system misidentifies a target. A defensive algorithm responds to perceived aggression. A chain reaction begins, faster than diplomatic channels can react. Unlike conventional weapons, these systems operate within complex data environments, where errors can occur not through intent, but through misinterpretation. At the same time, the proliferation of unmanned systems, drones operating in swarms, loitering munitions, autonomous surveillance platforms, is changing the scale and accessibility of military power. Capabilities once limited to major powers are becoming more widely available. This diffusion increases unpredictability, because the threshold for engagement is lowered, and the speed of escalation is increased. 6 flashpoints, different regions, different domains, yet they are connected by a common thread: high capability, high tension, and reduced reaction time. In each case, the systems in place are designed to deter conflict. But under pressure, those same systems can accelerate it. And as these flashpoints remain active, the balance between stability and escalation depends not only on strategy, but on restraint, coordination, and timing. The balance of power in today's world is not defined by a single capability. It is defined by reach, the ability to project force across continents, sustain operations across domains, respond within hours, anywhere on the planet. At the center of this capability is the United States. Its military structure is built for global presence. Carrier strike groups operate continuously across the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. Forward bases in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia allow rapid deployment of air and ground forces. Strategic bombers can launch from one continent and reach another without landing. This network is not static. It is reinforced through alliances. The NATO remains one of the most powerful collective defense systems in history. Its combined military spending, technological capacity, and integrated command structure provide a level of coordination unmatched by any single nation. Joint exercises simulate multi-front conflicts. Interoperability ensures that forces from different countries can operate as a single unit. Reinforcements can be mobilized quickly across member states. But this advantage is being challenged. The rise of China has altered the strategic balance, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. China's military modernization is focused, deliberate, and regionally concentrated. Its naval expansion has produced the world's largest fleet by number of vessels. Anti-ship missile systems, including long-range precision weapons, are designed to limit the ability of adversaries to operate freely near its coastline. This approach, often described as anti-access/area denial, prioritizes control over critical regions rather than global presence. Air capabilities are expanding as well. Advanced fighter jets, integrated air defense systems, and growing experience in joint operations are enhancing China's operational reach. The objective is not necessarily to mirror the global posture of the United States. It is to dominate strategically vital areas, particularly those linked to key flashpoints. Meanwhile, Russia presents a different kind of military profile. Its strength lies in depth, experience, and doctrine shaped by recent conflict. Operations in Ukraine have demonstrated both capabilities and limitations. Large-scale ground warfare, artillery dominance, and electronic warfare systems remain central components of Russian strategy. At the same time, logistical challenges and sustained resistance have revealed the complexities of modern conflict. Despite these challenges, Russia retains significant military power, particularly in missile forces, air defense systems, and strategic deterrence. Its geographic position allows rapid concentration of forces along its borders, and its doctrine emphasizes escalation control, managing conflict intensity while maintaining strategic options. Across Europe, NATO forces are adapting in response. Forward deployments have increased in countries near Russia's borders. Rapid reaction units are on higher readiness levels. Air and missile defense systems are being strengthened. This is not preparation for immediate conflict. It is preparation to prevent one. Further south and east, regional powers are also expanding their capabilities. Countries such as India, Japan, and South Korea are investing heavily in defense modernization, enhancing naval fleets, missile systems, and air power. These investments are often driven by regional security concerns, but they contribute to a broader global trend. Military capability is expanding across multiple centers of power. At sea, this shift is particularly visible. Naval forces are no longer concentrated in a single dominant fleet. Multiple nations now operate advanced submarines, aircraft carriers, and surface combatants equipped with long-range strike capabilities. Control of maritime routes, especially in regions like the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East, has become a strategic priority because these routes carry energy, trade, and communication infrastructure. In the air, superiority is no longer assumed. Advanced air defense systems, stealth technology, and electronic warfare are creating contested environments where control of the skies must be actively achieved and constantly maintained. Across land, sea, and air, one pattern is clear. No single power operates without challenge. Capabilities overlap. Reach intersects. Forces operate in proximity. The result is not imbalance, but tension. A dynamic equilibrium where strength is distributed but not equal. Where deterrence depends on perception as much as capability. And where the effectiveness of military power is measured not only by its use, but by its ability to prevent use. Yet beyond conventional forces, another layer of power exists. One that operates at far greater speed and carries far greater consequences. Beyond conventional forces, a different layer of military power defines the modern balance. It operates faster, it reaches farther, and its consequences are far more difficult to contain. At the core of this layer is nuclear deterrence. The United States and Russia together possess the majority of the world's nuclear warheads. These arsenals are not designed for battlefield use in the traditional sense. They exist to prevent war by making its cost unthinkable. Submarines patrol silently beneath the oceans, carrying ballistic missiles capable of striking across continents. Land-based missile silos remain on alert. Strategic bombers provide an airborne component to what is often described as the nuclear triad. China, while maintaining a smaller arsenal, is expanding and modernizing its nuclear forces, developing new delivery systems and increasing survivability. Deterrence, however, is not static. It depends on credibility, on communication, on perception, and in an environment of rising tension, even the signals meant to prevent conflict can be misinterpreted. Alongside nuclear systems, a new class of weapons is reshaping strategic calculations. Hypersonic missiles. These systems travel at speeds exceeding Mach 5, maneuvering unpredictably during flight. Traditional missile defense systems are not fully optimized to intercept them. Their speed reduces warning times. Their trajectories complicate detection. Both Russia and China have tested and deployed hypersonic systems, while the United States continues to accelerate its own development programs. The result is a shift in timing. Decision windows are shrinking. Leaders may have minutes, not hours, to assess a potential threat. In parallel, the widespread use of drones is transforming the battlefield at every level. From large, high-altitude surveillance platforms to small, low-cost, loitering munitions, unmanned systems are now central to modern conflict. Their use in the Russian invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated how relatively inexpensive systems can have strategic impact, targeting infrastructure, tracking movements, and shaping battlefield dynamics. In the Middle East, similar systems have been used in asymmetric operations, extending reach without direct confrontation. This evolution lowers barriers. Capabilities once limited to advanced militaries are becoming more accessible, and as more actors acquire them, the complexity of conflict increases. Beyond air and land, another domain is becoming increasingly contested: space. Satellites provide navigation, communication, intelligence, and early warning capabilities. Modern militaries depend on them. But these assets are vulnerable. Anti-satellite weapons, electronic interference, and cyber operations targeting space-based systems are all part of emerging strategies. Disruption in space does not remain in space. It affects operations on Earth immediately. A loss of satellite capability could impair communication, navigation, and coordination across entire military structures. At the same time, cyber warfare continues to evolve as a strategic tool. States are developing capabilities not only to defend their networks, but to penetrate and disrupt those of others. These operations can target command systems, logistics networks, and critical infrastructure. Unlike conventional attacks, they can occur without visible movement, and their effects can spread rapidly. Layered onto all of this is the integration of artificial intelligence. AI systems are being used to process vast amounts of data, identify patterns, and support decision-making. In some cases, they are integrated directly into operational systems, enhancing targeting accuracy, optimizing logistics, and accelerating response times. But speed introduces risk. In a highly automated environment, the pace of interaction between systems can exceed human oversight. Misinterpretations, false positives, or unexpected system behavior could trigger responses before they are fully understood. Control becomes more complex, and in high-stakes environments, complexity can become a vulnerability. Across nuclear deterrence, hypersonic weapons, drones, cyber capabilities, and space systems, a new pattern is emerging. Power is no longer defined only by scale. It is defined by speed, integration, and precision. These systems are designed to strengthen deterrence, to make conflict less likely. But under pressure, they can also compress decision-making, increase uncertainty, and amplify the consequences of error. The balance of power still exists, but it is evolving faster than the frameworks designed to manage it. And as this new age of warfare continues to take shape, the question is no longer only who holds power, but how that power behaves under stress. If a conflict emerges from one of the world's active flashpoints, its impact would not remain contained. Modern systems are too interconnected, economies too interdependent, military alliances too integrated. The first effects would be immediate and global. In the opening hours of escalation, military engagements would likely expand beyond their point of origin. A confrontation in the Taiwan Strait, for example, would not remain a regional naval conflict. It would draw in allied forces, disrupt commercial shipping routes, and trigger rapid diplomatic and military responses across multiple continents. Airspace could close. Maritime traffic could halt. Global trade would slow within days. Simultaneously, cyber operations would intensify. Critical infrastructure, power grids, communication networks, financial systems would become primary targets. These attacks would not necessarily aim for permanent destruction, but for disruption. Temporary outages, data interference, system overload. But in highly connected economies, even temporary disruption can have cascading effects. Financial markets would react immediately. Stock exchanges in major economies could suspend trading under extreme volatility. Currency values would fluctuate sharply. Capital flows would shift as investors seek stability. Confidence, one of the most critical elements of modern economies, would weaken. Supply chains, already strained by previous global disruptions, would face new pressure. Key shipping routes through regions like the South China Sea could become contested or unsafe. This region alone carries a significant portion of global maritime trade, including energy shipments and manufactured goods. Ports would slow operations. Insurance costs for shipping would rise sharply. Some routes might become temporarily inaccessible. The impact would be visible quickly. Shortages of critical components, delays in manufacturing, rising costs across industries. Energy markets would be particularly vulnerable. A conflict involving the Iran could affect key transit points, such as the Strait of Hormuz, through which a large share of the world's oil supply passes. Even limited disruption in this region would cause immediate price spikes. Fuel costs would rise globally. Transportation and production costs would follow. The economic effect would not be gradual. It would be sudden. At the same time, governments would begin implementing emergency measures. Strategic reserves could be released. Export controls might be introduced. Financial safeguards activated. But these measures take time to stabilize systems already under stress. Across major cities, the effects would begin to surface. Intermittent power disruptions, slower communication networks, increased security presence, public uncertainty. In regions closer to conflict zones, the situation would escalate more rapidly. Civilian populations could begin to move, seeking safety away from areas of potential military activity. Transportation networks would become congested. Border crossings would face increased pressure. The first wave of displacement would begin. Not yet a full-scale crisis, but the early stage of one. At the strategic level, military forces would transition to higher readiness. Naval fleets would reposition. Air defense systems would activate. Intelligence networks would intensify surveillance. Every movement would be observed, every signal interpreted, because in the early phase of escalation, clarity is limited. Information is incomplete, intentions are uncertain, and decisions must still be made. These initial moments would not determine the outcome of a conflict, but they would shape its trajectory, setting conditions that are difficult to reverse. And as systems absorb the shock of sudden disruption, economic, technological, and military, the longer-term consequences begin to take form. As the initial shock of escalation settles, the deeper consequences begin to unfold, not in hours or days, but in months and years. The first and most critical factor shaping this phase would be nuclear deterrence. The presence of nuclear arsenals held by the United States, Russia, and China creates a ceiling on escalation, one that has historically prevented direct conflict between major powers. But deterrence is not a guarantee. It is a balance maintained through signaling, communication, and restraint. In a prolonged crisis, that balance would be tested repeatedly. Strategic messaging, military exercises, force deployments, alert status changes could be interpreted in multiple ways. What is intended as deterrence could be seen as preparation. And in a high-stakes environment, perception shapes response. Even without nuclear use, the existence of these weapons would influence every decision, limiting some actions while increasing pressure in others. Beyond military considerations, the global economy would undergo structural change. Supply chains would not simply recover. They would reorganize. Dependence on single regions for critical components, such as semiconductors, energy, or rare earth materials, would be reduced. Countries would accelerate efforts to localize production or diversify sources. This process, often described as economic decoupling, is already underway in limited form. A major conflict would accelerate it dramatically. Global trade networks, built over decades, would become more fragmented. Regional blocs would strengthen. Cross-border cooperation would become more selective. At the same time, the human impact would expand. Refugee movements could reach levels not seen in modern history. Conflict zones, particularly those involving densely populated regions, would generate large-scale displacement. Neighboring countries would absorb the initial flow, but the effects would extend far beyond immediate borders. Humanitarian systems would face sustained pressure. Housing, healthcare, and food distribution networks would be stretched. International aid organizations would scale operations, but capacity would be challenged by the size and duration of the crisis. Energy would become a central point of competition. Access to oil, gas, and alternative energy sources would shape strategic decisions. Countries would seek to secure supply lines, protect infrastructure, and reduce vulnerability. This could lead to what analysts often describe as energy wars, not necessarily direct conflict, but sustained competition over access, pricing, and control. Regions rich in resources would gain strategic importance. Others would face increased dependence. At the geopolitical level, alliances could shift. Existing partnerships might deepen under pressure. New alignments could emerge based on shared interests, economic needs, or security concerns. Institutions designed to manage global cooperation would face strain. Consensus would be harder to achieve. Coordination more complex. Over time, the structure of global power could change, not through a single decisive event, but through cumulative pressure. Economic influence, military capability, and technological leadership would be reassessed. Some nations would adapt quickly. Others would struggle. The result would not necessarily be a return to the previous system. It would be the emergence of a different one, more fragmented, more competitive, potentially less predictable. And throughout this process, one factor would remain constant: uncertainty. Because even after the initial conflict stabilizes, if it stabilizes, the systems that supported global stability would have been altered. Rebuilt, perhaps, but not restored to what they were. The long-term consequences of escalation are not defined only by what is destroyed. They're defined by what replaces it, and how the world adapts to that change. The world exists today on a knife's edge, across continents, in the air, on the seas, and through the invisible networks of cyberspace. Multiple forces operate simultaneously, each powerful, each capable of shaping events in ways that were unimaginable a generation ago. Every decision by a government, every movement of a military unit, and every cyber signal carries weight. The margin between stability and escalation has narrowed. Yet, despite the danger, history offers perspective. Nations have faced brinkmanship before. During the Cold War, the presence of enormous destructive power forced restraint, negotiation, and diplomacy. That same logic still applies. Deterrence is not merely a military calculation. It is a human one. Leadership, judgment, and the willingness to pause can prevent catastrophe even when capabilities are immense and tensions are high. Modern technology accelerates conflict, but it also amplifies awareness. Satellites track movements in real time. Intelligence networks allow decisions to be informed with unprecedented precision. The tools that can destroy also provide insight and opportunity to prevent destruction. The choice, ultimately, is collective. Humanity has the capacity to avoid disaster. If caution guides action, alliances function as intended, and dialogue persists even under pressure. Lessons from past wars remind us that power without prudence can be devastating. Peace, fragile as it is, requires continual effort, not merely the absence of fighting. In a world defined by flashpoints, by autonomous systems, by nuclear arsenals and cyber networks, the balance of peace is delicate, but not impossible. It is a balance maintained not only through strength, but through responsibility. Not only through deterrence, but through restraint. The world watches, waits, and hopes. Because the consequences of miscalculation are global, and the opportunity to prevent them is now.